I was thrown into an arena with the most horrifying predator. You can have my entire planet if you tame this beast. The Empress laughed as my blood dripped onto the sand. For them it was a game. They expected my death. But I decided to break their system and play by my own rules. Illuminated only by the cold moonlight streaming through tall windows, the palace arena of Rosella resembled an ancient amphitheater, but with an alien grandeur that no human structure could match. The air hung thick with ozone that faintly stung the nostrils and carried the subtle scent of something otherworldly. A mixture of unfamiliar spices, crystalline minerals, and the electric tension that preceded important events. Around the arena, on tiered stands that seemed to float in midair, sat silent, stately aliens in dark, elegant robes that shimmered with threads of silver and blue. Their protective fields flickered around them like ghostly auras, creating a spectacle of light that danced across the vast chamber, casting eerie, elongated shadows across the sand-covered floor. The architecture of the arena itself defied conventional understanding of physics and geometry. Columns that should have collapsed under their own weight twisted into impossible spirals, supporting balconies that extended farther than structural integrity should allow. The ceiling arched high overhead, a dome of transparent material that revealed the three moons of this alien world, one silver, one pale blue, and one with a disturbing reddish tinge that painted portions of the arena in blood-colored light. In the center, on a throne of black stone, veined with luminescent blue crystal, sat Rosella. Her long, almost luminous white hair cascaded down her shoulders like a frozen waterfall, emphasizing the severe, angular features of her face. Her skin held a faint blue tint that seemed to pulse with the beating of alien hearts, growing more intense along the sharp lines of her cheekbones and the graceful curve of her throat. She appeared as if carved from ice. Her gaze, though directed at the arena, betrayed no emotion. The Empress sat perfectly still, only the occasional, slow blink of her silvery eyes indicating she was a living being and not a statue. Around her neck hung a pendant of strange metal, pulsing with the same blue energy that coursed through the veins of her world, occasionally sending tendrils of light across her ceremonial armor. Plates of some unknown material that seemed both liquid and solid simultaneously. The attendants surrounding her throne maintained a precise distance, not too close to imply familiarity, not too far to suggest fear. Their own robes, less elaborate than Rosella's but still indicative of high status, rustled softly with their careful, measured movements. One held a staff topped with a crystal that echoed the pendant at Rosella's throat. Another carried what appeared to be a ceremonial blade with a transparent edge that caught and refracted the moonlight into prismatic patterns. Below, on the sand that glittered with tiny crystal fragments, stood Oswin. His tall, muscular frame was a stark contrast to the elegant aliens watching him. Where they were slender and graceful, he was solid and powerful, a testament to a life spent in survival rather than ceremony. He wore simple leather armor reinforced with strips of metal, scratched and worn from countless battles and hunts across the stars. A heavy hunting bow crafted from the wood of his distant homeworld was strapped to his back, and a sword and several knives hung at his belt. Weapons that seemed primitive compared to the technology surrounding him, yet spoke of a more intimate, more personal approach to both hunting and warfare. His face was weathered by the harsh suns of many worlds, deep lines etching a map of hardship around his eyes and mouth. Those eyes, sharp and focused, looked not at Rosella but at a shadow slowly emerging from a dark passage at the far end of the arena. The crowd of alien spectators had fallen completely silent now, the earlier murmurs of anticipation fading to nothing as the moment of confrontation approached. Some leaned forward in their seats, others maintained their dignified posture, but all eyes were fixed on the arena floor. Several of the higher-ranking nobles manipulated small devices that allowed them to adjust their viewing experience, magnifying certain details or recording the proceedings for later analysis. The air felt charged with tension, as though the entire chamber held its collective breath. Oswin's journey to this moment had been long and arduous, a path paved with both triumph and tragedy. Once a renowned hunter from a tribe on a distant Earth colony called Viridian, he had been raised in the tradition of the Pathfinders, those who ventured beyond the settlement boundaries to map the wilderness and ensure the colony's survival. His father, Thorn, had been the chief huntsman before him, teaching Oswin from childhood the ways of tracking, the language of the forest, and the honor code that governed their relationship with the natural world. "We do not conquer the wild," his father had told him repeatedly. "We converse with it." Those lessons had served him well until the arrival of the Azurian scouts, alien explorers who had encountered the colony during a routine survey of potentially habitable worlds. What began as a diplomatic exchange quickly deteriorated into conflict when cultural misunderstandings led to violence. Oswin had been captured during a skirmish that claimed the lives of many of his kinsmen, including his younger brother Arik, whose death he still carried as a weight upon his soul. Sold into servitude by the Azurians to a race of beings known as the Krell, he had begun his unwilling journey across the stars. Through years of fighting in various arenas across 3-star systems, he had earned a reputation for surviving the impossible. Unlike many of his fellow gladiators who relied on brute strength or technological advantages, Oswin combined his hunting skills with a deep understanding of predator psychology. He studied his opponents, whether beast or sentient, learning their patterns, their weaknesses, and their breaking points. His victories were rarely quick or clean, but often involved a strategic patience that frustrated arena owners who preferred spectacular shows of violence to the careful chess game Oswin played with his adversaries. Word of his skills had reached Rosella, whose appetite for unusual entertainment was well known across the sector. She had purchased him for an astronomical sum, curious to see if the stories were true, if this human hunter could indeed outsmart creatures that had defied the most advanced training methods of her own people. Now he stood before her, his final test ahead of him, with freedom and an entire world hanging in the balance. From the shadows stepped Thunder, a blue wolf unlike any creature Oswin had encountered in all his travels. The beast was truly gigantic, the size of a small horse, its muscular body rippling with power beneath fur that shimmered like stardust. Each hair seemed to contain a universe of its own, shifting between shades of midnight blue and electric azure as the creature moved, creating an effect like flowing water or a night sky in motion. Its eyes glowed with yellow fire, intelligent and ancient, as if the beast had witnessed the birth of stars and carried that primordial light within its gaze. From its jaws came a low, deep growl that vibrated throughout the arena, making the very air tremble and causing several of the more sensitive alien spectators to flinch or adjust their protective fields. The wolf was not just a wild beast. He was the very essence of this wild and merciless world, the spirit of its untamed wilderness given flesh and fang. Legends among Rosella's people spoke of creatures like Thunder as manifestations of planetary consciousness, apex predators that embodied the will and character of the worlds they inhabited. Whether such stories were mere mythology or contained kernels of truth, the effect was undeniable. Thunder carried himself with a presence that transcended ordinary animal nobility, suggesting something almost supernatural in his bearing. As he fully emerged into the arena light, more details became apparent. Scars crisscrossed his flanks and shoulders, testament to battles fought and won against formidable opponents. One ear was notched, another mark of past violence. Most striking was a patch of fur on his chest that formed a pattern resembling a starburst, where the blue seemed most intense, almost luminous in the moonlight streaming from above. His claws, black as volcanic glass, left small gouges in the arena floor, with each measured step. Thunder sniffed the air with deliberate movements, his massive head swinging from side to side. His gaze swept across the stands, lingering momentarily on Rosella before settling on Oswin. In those burning eyes, hunger and predatory cruelty, but also something more, something that spoke of intelligence beyond that of a mere animal. There was calculation there, memory, and a fierce pride that recognized no master. His massive paws left imprints in the sand as he began to circle, muscles coiled and ready to spring, tail held low but not tucked. A predator confident in its territory, evaluating a potential threat or prey. The stillness of the arena deepened as the two opponents assessed one another. Thunder continued his circular path, never taking his eyes from Oswin, who stood motionless at the center, only his head turning to track the wolf's movement. This was the moment of truth, the first encounter that would set the tone for everything that followed. Oswin knew from experience that initial impressions mattered greatly when dealing with predators. Show fear, and you become prey. Show aggression, and you become a threat to be eliminated. The balance had to be perfect. Respect without submission, confidence without challenge. Rosella leaned forward almost imperceptibly, the first movement she had made in hours. Her fingers tightened slightly on the armrests of her throne, betraying a hint of anticipation that belied her otherwise perfect composure. Her voice, cold and clear as a mountain stream, cut through the silence with the precision of a blade. "You can have my entire planet if you tame this predator," she called loudly. The words echoed across the arena, bouncing from the curved walls and returning as ghostly repetitions that seemed to emphasize their importance. A murmur rippled through the watching aliens, some exchanging glances of disbelief, others making small gestures that might have been their equivalent of nervous laughter. Such a prize had never been offered before, not in all the long history of Rosella's rule. The Empress was known for her cruelty and her iron grip on her domain, having expanded her empire through conquest and diplomatic manipulation over centuries. To offer an entire world was unprecedented, suggesting either supreme confidence in the wolf's lethality or some deeper game that the spectators could not yet discern. Some of the court whispered that she must be certain of the human's death. Others speculated that this was merely entertainment for her, a jest at the expense of a creature she considered inferior. The more politically astute among them wondered if this was some elaborate test for potential usurpers in her court. Anyone too eager at the prospect of a change in leadership might reveal themselves through their reaction to this outlandish offer. The head of Rosella's personal guard, a towering alien named Vex, leaned close to whisper something in her ear, perhaps questioning the wisdom of such a promise. She silenced him with a barely perceptible gesture, her eyes never leaving the arena floor. Oswin nodded, his face betraying nothing of the storm of emotions within. Surprise at the magnitude of the offer, skepticism about its sincerity, calculation of his chances against the magnificent predator before him. He knew the price of those words, knew the slim chances of his survival, much less success. But freedom beckoned in the challenge, awakened something primal in his blood. He had not survived this long by backing down from impossible odds. His mind raced through memories of similar encounters on other worlds. The crystal serpents of Araxis Prime, the shadow panthers of the Obsidian Moons, the psychic hunters of the Veil Nebula. Each had required a different approach, a different understanding. Thunder would be no different. Already Oswin was noting details, the wolf's gait suggesting a slight favoring of his right foreleg, perhaps an old injury, the pattern of his breathing indicating heightened alertness, but not yet full combat readiness. The way his eyes tracked not just Oswin's obvious movements, but the subtle shifts of weight and balance that might telegraph intention. Nothing is untamable to those who understand the wild. The question is whether I have time to understand you, magnificent one, before you tear out my throat, Oswin muttered under his breath. His hand moved slowly toward his knife, eyes never leaving the wolf. It was not an aggressive gesture, but a preparatory one. Oswin had no illusions about attacking first. His blade would be a last resort, a means of buying precious seconds rather than securing victory. Thunder watched this movement with keen intelligence, yellow eyes tracking every twitch of muscle. The tension between man and beast stretched taut as a bowstring, the entire arena holding its breath. Thunder, like the lightning that was his namesake, lunged at Oswin without warning. There was no telegraphing of intent, no gathering of haunches or preliminary growl. One moment he was circling, the next he was airborne, jaws open and aimed at Oswin's throat. He moved with incredible speed that belied his enormous size, his massive paws raising clouds of crystalline dust as they launched him forward. The attack was not just physically impressive but tactically sound, timed precisely when Oswin's hand had moved toward his weapon, creating a momentary distraction from the wolf's position. Oswin reacted with the instincts honed through years of survival. He dodged the first leap, rolling across the sand with practiced precision, coming up in a defensive crouch with his knife finally drawn. It was not a clean escape, however. As Thunder sailed past, a paw strike caught Oswin's shoulder with devastating force, sending him staggering. The leather armor tore like paper beneath those obsidian claws, and a deep scratch appeared on his arm, blood welling immediately to the surface and running down to his elbow. The pain was sharp but clarifying, reminding Oswin of the stakes and the very real danger he faced. The wolf skidded to a halt, then turned for a second attack without hesitation. There was no wasted motion, no pause for recalculation. Thunder moved with the fluid efficiency of an apex predator who had never needed to second-guess his lethal capabilities. Oswin grabbed for his sword, the blade singing as it left its sheath, metal gleaming dully in the mixed moonlight. But Thunder was already upon him, anticipating the defensive movement. The collision of beast and man sent them both tumbling across the arena floor in a chaos of limbs, fur, and flashing metal. For a moment, the outcome hung in the balance as they struggled. Oswin tried to deflect the wolf's weight with his blade, angling it to discourage rather than wound, an instinctive choice that spoke to his hunter's ethic rather than a gladiator's killing intent. But Thunder was too strong, too fast, and too experienced to be denied. With a powerful twist of his muscular body, he knocked the weapon from Oswin's grasp. The sword clattered away across the sand, coming to rest near the arena wall, now hopelessly out of reach. In the next instant, Oswin felt himself lifted and thrown through the air as if he weighed nothing. Thunder's massive jaws having secured a grip on his armor and used it as a point of leverage. The world spun around him in a blur of light and shadow before he crashed against the arena wall with bone-jarring force, his head striking stone with enough impact to send stars exploding across his vision. Through the explosion of pain and the ringing in his ears, he felt warm blood trickling down his face, mixing with sweat and dust. The crowd's murmur rose slightly at this display of Thunder's power, then subsided as Rosella raised a hand for silence. She was watching intently now, her posture still relaxed but her eyes sharp, missing nothing of the encounter below. Oswin struggled to regain his feet, using the wall for support. His vision swam, the arena spinning around him as he fought against encroaching darkness at the edges of his consciousness. This was not his first concussion, and he recognized the symptoms: the nausea, the disorientation, the dangerous impulse to simply lie down and rest. But rest now meant death, so he forced himself upright, blinking rapidly to clear his sight. Thunder stalked toward him, taking his time now, savoring the hunt. This was a calculated shift in tactics, from explosive speed to intimidating patience. The wolf's ears were forward, his tail held high, his whole demeanor suggesting supreme confidence. He was not merely attacking, he was demonstrating dominance, asserting his place in the natural hierarchy of predator and prey. Each step was measured, powerful haunches bunching and releasing with controlled strength. You are wild, magnificent in your fury, but I have faced the wild before, and I am still here, Oswin said hoarsely. Thunder stood over him, his jaws open in an ominous growl that displayed teeth like daggers. Not the canines of an earth wolf, but something more complex, a double row of serrated edges designed for maximum tearing efficiency. Saliva dripped from them, catching the light in glistening strands. The smell of blood seemed to drive the beast into a frenzy, saliva dripping from his mouth as he prepared for the kill. His pupils had dilated fully, black, overtaking the yellow fire of his irises in a sign of predatory focus that Oswin recognized all too well. Through the haze of pain, Oswin saw Rosella shift on her throne, a barely perceptible smile touching her lips. It was the smile of a predator watching another predator work, cold, appreciative, devoid of mercy. There was something in her expression that suggested she had seen this scenario play out before, perhaps many times, with different opponents, but always the same outcome. Thunder was her champion, her embodiment of unstoppable natural force. In him, she saw a reflection of her own approach to power, overwhelming, merciless, and ultimately triumphant. With a surge of desperate energy, Oswin tried to stand fully, but his body rebelled against the movement. Every muscle screamed in protest, his vision darkening at the edges. The earlier blow to his head was taking its toll, compromising his coordination and strength when he needed them most. Thunder sensed his weakness with the unerring instinct of a hunter accustomed to identifying vulnerability. The wolf lunged again, this time aiming directly for his throat, going for the killing strike that would end the contest. In the final moment before those jaws closed on his neck, Oswin managed to raise his arm in defense, positioning it across his throat. It was a desperate move, sacrificing limb to save life. Thunder's teeth clamped down on his forearm with crushing force. Oswin screamed, the sound tearing from his throat unbidden. His armor shredded under the pressure, and teeth sank deep into muscle and scraped against bone. Blood soaked the sand beneath them, turning the glittering crystals dark. The aliens in the stands watched with dispassionate curiosity, some leaning forward for a better view of the human suffering, others maintaining their statuesque stillness. A few manipulated small devices, adjusting their sensory filters to better appreciate the spectacle, some enhancing visual acuity to see the detail of torn flesh, others amplifying the sounds of combat or even the scent of blood and fear that permeated the arena. Rosella continued to observe, her face an alabaster mask showing no compassion, no excitement, nothing but clinical interest. Her long fingers tapped a rhythm on the arm of her throne, perhaps unconsciously keeping time with Oswin's racing heartbeat. Her guards stood motionless at her side, trained to respond only to threats against her person, not to interfere in the entertainment she had arranged. The counselors and courtiers nearest her throne maintained careful expressions of neutrality, reflecting their empress's demeanor, rather than revealing their own reactions to the violence below. Oswin caught her gaze through the haze of agony, their eyes meeting across the distance of arena sand and social hierarchy. Something inside him changed in that moment. A spark of mad fury ignited in his eyes, burning away the pain and fear. It was not the survival instinct of a cornered animal, but something deeper, more human. Defiance in the face of callous power, refusal to become mere spectacle for the amusement of those who viewed life and death as entertainment. He understood with sudden clarity that this was not merely a fight for survival. It was a test of will, of spirit. Rosella was not looking for a victor in combat, but for something more. Proof that humanity possessed a strength that her people respected. Not the strength of technology or numbers, but the inner fortitude that allowed a species to survive on 1,000 hostile worlds, to endure conditions that would break lesser beings. In Thunder, she had found the perfect embodiment of her world's wild power. In Oswin, perhaps, she sought a worthy counterpart, someone who could stand against that power not through superior force, but through the uniquely human combination of adaptability, tenacity, and understanding. Despite the excruciating pain radiating from his forearm, Oswin made one last, desperate attempt. With his free hand, he grabbed a jagged stone lying nearby, fingers closing around it with the last of his strength. It was not an ideal weapon, too small to cause serious damage to a creature of Thunder's size. But it was all he had. With a roar that came from the depths of his ancestral past, from the primal part of human consciousness that first stood against the predators of Earth's ancient savannas, he brought the stone down on Thunder's sensitive nose with all the force he could muster. The wolf yelped in surprise, more startled than hurt by the unexpected resistance. He backed away momentarily, releasing Oswin's mangled arm. Blood poured freely from the deep puncture wounds, but Oswin barely noticed. This tiny victory, this moment of defiance in the face of certain death, fueled him. He dragged himself backward, leaving a trail of blood on the sand. His body trembled uncontrollably from shock and exertion, but his gaze remained unwavering, fixed on the wolf with not just determination, but understanding. We are not so different, you and I, both trapped in games of power not our own making. Both fighting because we must, not because we choose. Oswin whispered, the words too quiet for any but Thunder to hear, spoken not for the audience, but for the wolf and perhaps for Oswin himself. A recognition of their shared circumstance despite the vast differences between them. In that moment, watching Thunder reassess him with those intelligent eyes, Oswin saw not just a predator, but a fellow prisoner of Rosella's machinations. Thunder hesitated, confusion momentarily replacing the killer instinct in his eyes. His ears flicked forward, then back, signs of uncertainty that would have been undetectable to anyone without Oswin's experience reading animal behavior. The wolf took a step forward, then stopped, his posture still aggressive, but his previous single-minded attack momentum broken. Something in the human's response had triggered a reassessment, interrupting the familiar pattern of hunt and kill. Before Thunder could renew his attack, or Oswin could attempt further communication, guards appeared from side passages, two tall aliens in blue armor that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Their helmets concealed their features entirely, giving them an impersonal, almost mechanical appearance despite their obviously organic movement. They approached Oswin with practiced caution, their weapons, long staffs topped with energy projectors, held at the ready but not aimed directly at him or Thunder. "The fight is over. You have lost, human, but you have survived longer than most. The Empress is satisfied with your performance," one guard, Moren, stated, his words coming through a translator embedded in his armor, turning the musical alien language into flat, emotionless human speech. The artificial voice added another layer of surreality to the moment, making Oswin wonder briefly if he had indeed lost consciousness and was now dreaming the encounter. But the pain pulsing through his arm and head was too immediate, too visceral to be anything but real. Thunder growled at the guard's approach, backing away but maintaining his aggressive stance. One guard raised his staff slightly, energy crackling at its tip, a warning to the wolf. Thunder responded with a deeper growl but did not attack, seeming to understand the implicit threat. The second guard moved toward Oswin, bending to help him rise. Oswin could barely comprehend the meaning of Morin's words through the waves of pain crashing over him. He was aware of being lifted, his weight supported between the two guards as they led him toward one of the arena exits. Thunder's growls faded into the distance behind them, and Oswin had the strange, possibly concussion-induced impression that there was something almost regretful in those final sounds. As though the wolf, too, sensed that their encounter had been prematurely truncated, that something important had begun but remained unfinished. As they guided him through shadowed corridors, Oswin felt Rosella's penetrating stare following him out of the arena. Just before consciousness fled, before the combination of pain, blood loss, and head trauma finally overwhelmed his determination to remain awake, he caught a glimpse of her expression, unchanged in its coldness, yet somehow different. There was a barely noticeable glimmer of interest in her eyes, a spark that had not been there before. Whether it signified respect, curiosity, or merely surprise at his survival, Oswin could not tell, but he carried that image with him as darkness claimed him, a final puzzle piece to consider when consciousness returned. Days passed in a haze of pain and healing. Oswin lay on a hard bed in a chamber that seemed more laboratory than infirmary, its walls gleaming with a metallic substance that shifted colors subtly according to some pattern he could not discern. Strange alien medical devices hissed and hummed above him, projecting fields of blue energy that knitted his flesh together at an accelerated rate. His wounds were deep but had somehow missed major arteries and tendons. Luck, or perhaps Thunder's precision, for predators often knew exactly how to disable without immediately killing, especially when playing with their prey rather than hunting from genuine hunger. The wounds from the beast's teeth were particularly gruesome, a circle of punctures that would leave scars to remind him of this day for the rest of his life. Each tooth had left its distinct mark, creating a pattern that resembled a bizarre constellation across his forearm. The alien medicine prevented infection, but did little to manage pain, operating on principles that treated the body as a machine to be repaired rather than a sentient being experiencing suffering. Perhaps Rosella's people did not experience pain as humans did, or perhaps they simply did not consider its alleviation a medical priority. A blue-skinned alien nurse moved around him with efficient grace, her six-fingered hands adjusting equipment and applying salves that burned like fire before numbing the pain. Her movements had a rhythmic quality, almost ritualistic, suggesting that healing in this culture involved elements beyond the purely medical. She hummed occasionally, a sound at the edge of Oswin's hearing range that made his teeth ache, but seemed to activate certain functions in the equipment surrounding him. Her face, with its large, pupil-less eyes and delicate bone structure, was difficult for Oswin to read. Her species communicated emotion through subtle color changes in their skin and through pheromones his human senses could not detect. But there was something in her manner, a gentleness perhaps, that contrasted with the clinical coldness of the environment. She spent more time at his bedside than seemed strictly necessary for her medical duties, sometimes watching him with what might have been curiosity. Oswin gritted his teeth, refusing to show weakness. On his homeworld, warriors bore pain in silence, and he would not dishonor his ancestors' ways, even here among the stars. The teachings of his father came back to him, lessons imparted during his first hunting wounds, during the tribal initiation that had left scars he still carried on his back, during the harsh winters when food was scarce and every member of the community had to endure hardship without complaint. Pain is information, his father had told him. Listen to it, understand it, but never let it master you. So Oswin listened to his body's signals, cataloging the damage, gauging his recovery, but maintained a stoic exterior that earned him curious glances from the medical staff. They were accustomed to different reactions from the various species that passed through their care. Some who wailed and thrashed, others who retreated into catatonic states, but few who met suffering with such composed endurance. You were lucky, human, extremely lucky. Few survive an encounter with thunder. Fewer still retain their limbs afterward. He has killed warriors from a dozen worlds, some with natural armor thicker than any protection you could wear, the alien nurse, Irva, said. Her voice held a musical quality despite the clinical words, and Oswin detected something like respect in her tone. The translator device beside his bed rendered her speech into his language, but it could not fully capture the harmonics that added layers of meaning to the alien tongue. There were subtleties lost in translation, nuances that might have revealed more about her thoughts or the wider context of his situation here. Oswin remained silent, conserving his strength. His eyes were drawn to the large window that dominated one wall of the chamber, beyond which stretched a vast, dark forest. The trees reached skyward like the tentacles of some enormous creature, their foliage a strange mix of colors that seemed wrong to his earth-born eyes, purples and blues where there should be green, moving in patterns that suggested more than mere wind at work. Yet there was something familiar in that wilderness, something that called to the hunter in his blood. Beneath the alien appearance lay recognizable patterns, the relationship between canopy and understory, the clustering of similar species, the signs of animal trails winding between trunks. Nature, it seemed, followed certain universal principles, even when the specific forms were wildly different. As he watched, a flock of winged creatures erupted from the treetops, their bodies long and sinuous like aerial eels. Their movements coordinated in complex formations that suggested either hive mind communication or sophisticated social structures. They circled once above the forest before disappearing beyond his field of view. The sight stirred something in him, a yearning for open spaces, for the freedom of wilderness after the confines of arenas and cells that had defined much of his recent existence. "Where do they keep him? The wolf?" Oswin asked quietly. The nurse paused in her work, her large pupil-less eyes studying him with surprise. Her skin flickered briefly with a pattern of lighter blue, an emotional response his human brain could not interpret but which seemed significant. "You should focus on healing, human. Forget the beast," she said hesitantly. "Many in your position would be experiencing trauma, fear responses, aversion to any reminder of their ordeal. Yet you ask about thunder with no hatred in your voice. Curious." "Where?" Oswin insisted. The nurse hesitated, glancing toward the door as if concerned about being overheard. Her hands made a quick gesture, perhaps a superstitious warding or simply a nervous habit. Finally, she answered in a lowered voice. "They take him to the forest to hunt, near the Great Lake beyond the northern ridge. It is his natural environment, one of the few places where he seems at peace. But no one approaches him closely when he is there. He is too dangerous, too unpredictable. The handlers release him from a distance and track him through implants. Even they fear him, for he has killed 3 of their number despite their protective fields." She adjusted a dial on one of the machines, causing the blue field above Oswin to intensify. The increased energy made his skin tingle uncomfortably, but he sensed it was accelerating the healing process. The forest is forbidden to all but the Empress's chosen few. It is sacred ground, they say, connected to the old powers of our world. Thunder is permitted there because he is considered a manifestation of those powers. You would not be granted such privilege, especially now, Irva cautioned. But Oswin barely heard the warning in her words. A spark of hope ignited in his eyes, a plan beginning to form in the recesses of his mind. This was his chance, not to fight the wolf again, but to understand him. Oswin had been a hunter before he was a gladiator, had tracked the deadliest predators on 3 worlds. He knew the forest, knew animals and their ways, knew how the wild mind worked. This would not be a battle this time, but a hunt of a different kind, a hunt for understanding. Every creature speaks a language. One just needs the patience to learn it. And patience is something I have cultivated through many long nights of tracking and waiting, Oswin murmured to himself. The nurse gave him a strange look, but asked no further questions. There was something in his tone, a certainty perhaps, that discouraged interrogation. She completed her treatments and left him to rest, the door sealing behind her with a soft hiss of hydraulics. Oswin closed his eyes, but sleep did not come. Instead, he began to plan, his mind working through possibilities, contingencies, the 1,000 details that might mean the difference between success and failure, between life and death. Through the long hours of the night, as the moons traversed the sky outside his window, he constructed a mental map of what he knew and what he needed to learn. The wolf's territory, the guard's schedules, the palace security systems, his own physical limitations during recovery, all factors to be considered. He had always been methodical in his approach to hunting, preferring preparation to improvisation whenever possible. This would be no different, except that his quarry was not prey to be killed, but a potential ally to be understood. As dawn broke, painting the alien forest in shades of amber and rose, Oswin made his decision. He would find Thunder again, on different terms, in the wild where both of them truly belonged. Whether this led to his death or to the fulfillment of Rosella's improbable offer, he could not predict. But the path was clear, the only path that offered something beyond mere survival, something that might restore meaning to an existence that had been reduced to fighting for the entertainment of beings who viewed him as little more than a clever animal. He would need time to recover, to observe, to plan. But time was perhaps the only resource he had in abundance. And so he settled into a rhythm of healing and preparation, marking the passage of days not with despair, but with growing anticipation of the challenge ahead. 3 weeks passed before Oswin's wounds had healed enough for him to move without pain. The alien medicine worked wonders, accelerating his recovery far beyond what would have been possible on his homeworld. Where human medicine might have required months to restore full function to his damaged arm, Rosella's physicians had achieved it in a fraction of that time. Still, he was careful to mask the extent of his recovery, maintaining a slight wince when using the arm, moving more slowly than necessary when under observation. It was an old hunter's trick. To be underestimated was to gain advantage. During this time, he observed the patterns of the palace guards, learned the schedules of Thunder's forest excursions, and studied maps of the surrounding wilderness that he bribed from a servant with trinkets saved from his gladiatorial victories. The servant, a diminutive being named Plex with skin that changed color according to the ambient light, was eager for the exotic items Oswin had collected during his travels, particularly a small music box from the Centauri colonies that played melodies based on mathematical sequences rather than traditional scales. Such treasures were worth far more than mere information to a being who had never left Rosella's world. Oswin also cultivated relationships with his caretakers, particularly Irva, whose initial clinical detachment had gradually given way to genuine interest in her unusual patient. She spoke to him of her world's history, of the complex hierarchy that governed Rosella's court, of the religious significance of the northern forests. Most valuably, she revealed details of the security systems that monitored the palace grounds and the wilderness beyond. Information she probably should not have shared, but offered freely in their conversations, perhaps not realizing its strategic value to Oswin. He learned that the forest was considered sacred not merely out of tradition, but because of certain properties of the flora there, properties that interfered with the standard monitoring technologies Rosella's people relied upon. There were blind spots in the surveillance network, areas where the density of certain mineral-rich trees created natural Faraday cages that blocked signal transmission. It was one reason Thunder was fitted with multiple redundant tracking devices when released to hunt, and why guards always accompanied him to and from the forest in pairs or larger groups. When he finally made his move, it was during the changing of the guard, a time he had identified as optimal through careful observation. The palace security followed precise routines, but there was a 2-minute window during shift rotation when attention was divided between handover protocols and the arrival of fresh personnel. Oswin slipped from the healing chambers dressed not in the garments provided by the palace, but in his old hunting leathers that he had insisted be returned to him as a matter of cultural respect. A request granted more out of curiosity than consideration, but useful nonetheless. The familiar weight of the bow on his back and knives at his belt grounded him, reminders of who he had been before captivity and who he might become again. The hallways of the palace were designed for beings taller than humans, with high ceilings and elongated doorways that created an atmosphere of perpetual dwarfing. The lighting came from bioluminescent panels that adjusted to the time of day, now dimmed to simulate dusk despite the actual afternoon hour outside. Oswin moved through these corridors with practiced stealth, using the exaggerated shadows as cover, timing his movements to coincide with the subtle vibrations in the floor that indicated guards patrolling adjacent sections. He had mapped multiple potential routes to the eastern exit, which offered the most direct access to the forest path. 2 proved blocked by unexpected security details, but the third, a service corridor used primarily by maintenance drones, provided clear passage. The door at the end required a palm print for access, but Oswin had prepared for this, using a technique he had learned from a cellmate in the Krell arenas. A thin film harvested from the adhesive medical patches used on his wounds, treated with microscopic particles of dust collected from high-traffic areas, could sometimes fool biometric scanners calibrated for alien physiologies. It was not perfect, succeeding perhaps 3 times in 10, but it was his best option. To his relief, the improvised countermeasure worked on the second attempt. The door slid open with a quiet hiss, revealing a loading area where supply vehicles delivered provisions to the palace. Most were automated, but a few were operated by members of a subservient species, smaller blue-skinned beings with multiple arms and elongated craniums. They paid little attention to Oswin as he moved purposefully across the area, his posture suggesting authorized business rather than escape. In his experience, confidence was often the most effective disguise. Beyond the loading area lay the formal gardens that surrounded the palace, a showcase of botanical engineering where plants had been modified to grow in mathematical patterns and emit harmonics when stimulated by specific light frequencies. During formal events, these gardens became living musical instruments, their collective sound conducted by specialists who used light wands to create symphonies of alien complexity. Now they were silent, their caretakers absent during the heat of mid-afternoon. Oswin navigated the precise geometric pathways, using the tall, spiral-shaped growths as cover whenever security drones passed overhead. These automated sentries swept the grounds at regular intervals, their sensors calibrated primarily for larger groups or unfamiliar energy signatures rather than individual organic life forms. Still, each close passage brought a surge of tension, a reminder that discovery would likely mean the end of his chance to find Thunder, and perhaps the end of his life, depending on Rosella's mood when informed of his transgression. The forest beyond the palace boundaries was even more alien up close than it had appeared from his window. The transition from cultivated gardens to wilderness was abrupt, as though the palace groundskeepers had given up any attempt to tame the native ecosystem and instead created a hard boundary between civilization and chaos. Oswin paused at this threshold, taking in the environment he was about to enter, assessing its dangers and opportunities with the practiced eye of a seasoned hunter. He moved through it with practiced stealth, adapting quickly to the strange terrain. The trees here towered hundreds of feet overhead, their trunks wider than 3 men with arms outstretched. Unlike earth forests with their predictable pattern of trunk and branch, these growths followed spiral patterns, their limbs curving in logarithmic sequences that created natural helixes reaching toward the sky. The foliage ranged from deep emerald green to purple and even shades of blue that matched Thunder's coat, not arranged in leaves but in feather-like structures that trembled continuously even in still air, suggesting some function beyond mere photosynthesis. The ground beneath his feet was not soil as he understood it, but a dense mat of interwoven root structures covered with a moss-like organism that pulsed faintly when stepped upon. In some places, this ground cover emitted a soft luminescence, creating pools of ghostly light beneath the canopy's shadow. Small creatures scurried through this undergrowth, six-legged analogues of rodents, invertebrates with translucent exoskeletons that revealed internal organs glowing with bioluminescence, floating jellyfish-like beings that drifted between tree trunks on invisible air currents. The air was cooler here than in the palace, carrying scents that were simultaneously familiar and utterly foreign. Rich decomposition, water-laden vegetation, the musk of animal life, but all with chemical undertones that his human olfactory system struggled to process. There was a background hum, too, just at the edge of hearing, perhaps the collective sound of millions of tiny organisms, or some property of the plant life itself responding to wind or light or processes he could not comprehend. His wounds still ached with dull persistence, but he ignored the discomfort, focusing instead on the task at hand. He followed the barely visible tracks left when Thunder was taken for his controlled excursions. Broken twigs at a height that spoke of a large creature's passing, tufts of blue, fur caught on rough bark, and most telling, the distinctive paw prints pressed into the softer sections of ground cover. These were massive, larger than his spread hand, with claw marks that dug deep channels into the substrate. The pattern of movement suggested purpose rather than random wandering. Thunder knew where he was going when brought to this forest, had destinations in mind. Oswin tracked these signs with methodical patience, building a mental map of the wolf's habitual routes. He noted how the path sometimes followed elevated ridges where visibility would be good, other times dipped into sheltered valleys where water collected in clear pools. This was not random movement, but the behavior of a territorial predator patrolling his domain, marking boundaries, checking hunting grounds, and visiting sources of water and shelter. Though alien in form, Thunder's behavior followed patterns Oswin recognized from predators across multiple worlds. The universal logic of survival, transcending the specifics of evolution. After hours of careful tracking, with the alien sun beginning to lower toward the horizon, casting long purple shadows through the forest, Oswin found a suitable vantage point, a massive tree with a natural hollow halfway up its trunk, accessible via the spiraling pattern of its bark, which formed a kind of natural staircase. He climbed with the ease of long practice, favoring his healed arm slightly, but finding it stronger than expected. The hollow offered both concealment and a clear view of a large clearing below, where multiple animal trails converged near a small stream that burbled over rocks striated with blue crystal. From here he could observe without being observed, the first rule of successful hunting. He settled into position, arranging his minimal supplies, water, dried rations, basic medical supplies taken from the infirmary, for easy access. Then he prepared himself for the long wait, slowing his breathing, entering the state of patient alertness that had served him well on 100 hunts across the stars. Time passed differently for a hunter on watch, neither racing nor crawling, but flowing in a rhythm dictated by the environment rather than artificial measures. His patience was rewarded as the day wore on. Through the dense foliage, he spotted movement, alien guards in their distinctive armor, leading Thunder on what appeared to be an impossibly strong chain made of some metal that gleamed with inner light. The wolf moved with reluctant grace, muscles rippling beneath his starlit coat. Even restrained, there was something majestic about him, a primal power that commanded respect. The guard's caution was evident in every movement. They maintained precise formation around Thunder, never allowing him to move behind any of them, never relaxing their vigilance despite the apparent security of their technical advantages. Their protective fields were fully activated, humming with energy that created a slight distortion in the air around them. They communicated in short phrases, using their native tongue rather than translation devices, but their tension needed no linguistic interpretation. Thunder pulled against his bonds constantly, growling and snapping at his handlers when they tugged too hard or directed him away from paths he wished to explore. There was calculation in those actions, Oswin noted. The wolf was testing boundaries, assessing weaknesses, learning the patterns of his captors even as they sought to control him. His eyes constantly searched the trees as if looking for escape routes, cataloging changes in the territory since his last visit. This was not just an animal acting on instinct. There was intelligence behind those fiery eyes, a mind that processed information and adapted strategies based on experience. The guards brought Thunder to the clearing below Oswin's hiding place, then retreated to a safe distance. One of them activated a device on their wrist, and the collar around Thunder's neck released with a metallic clang that echoed through the forest, startling nearby creatures into momentary silence. For a moment, the wolf stood perfectly still, as if disbelieving his freedom. His ears swiveled, catching every sound of the forest. His nostrils flared, reacquainting himself with the sense of his domain. Then he bolted, disappearing into the undergrowth with astonishing speed. The guards made no move to follow, merely activating tracking devices before heading back the way they had come, their postures noticeably relaxing once Thunder was no longer in their immediate vicinity. Their voices carried to Oswin's hiding place, fragments of conversation suggesting they would return at the designated hour to recapture the wolf, a task they clearly did not relish. Oswin remained motionless in his perch until long after they had gone, until the forest's ambient sounds had returned to their normal patterns, indicating the ecosystem had reset to its baseline state after the disruption of the guard's presence. Then, moving with the silence that had made him a feared hunter on multiple worlds, he descended from his hiding place and began to track the now free Thunder. It was challenging work, more difficult than tracking any Earth predator would have been. The wolf moved quickly and erratically, doubling back on his trail and crossing streams to break his scent, intelligent behavior that spoke to previous experience evading pursuit. The alien environment added another layer of complexity. Vegetation here didn't break or bend as Earth plants would, sometimes regenerating almost immediately after Thunder's passage, erasing signs that would have been obvious in a terrestrial forest. But Oswin had tracked willier prey in his time, and gradually, over days of patient observation, he built a map in his mind of Thunder's territory and habits. He established a hidden camp in the hollow of a lightning-struck tree, large enough to sleep in but small enough to be easily concealed. From this base, he conducted daily explorations, always careful to stay downwind of areas where Thunder might be hunting, always maintaining escape routes in case of unexpected encounters. He learned that the wolf hunted the small, deer-like creatures that bounded through the forest undergrowth on spring-loaded limbs that allowed them to leap tremendous distances between trees. Thunder would position himself beneath their aerial pathways, timing his jumps with uncanny precision to snatch them mid-flight. He drank from a crystal-clear mountain stream that cut through a rocky gorge, always approaching from upstream and scanning the area thoroughly before lowering his guard enough to drink. Most importantly, Oswin discovered that the wolf had a favorite place to rest, a large flat rock beside a small waterfall where the mist created rainbows in the alien sunlight and the sound of falling water would mask the approach of potential threats. This location became the focus of Oswin's strategy. It offered predictability in the otherwise chaotic pattern of Thunder's movements, a place where he could reasonably expect to find the wolf at certain times of day, particularly after successful hunts when the predator would be satiated and potentially more receptive to unusual events. It was here that Oswin decided to make his first move. While Thunder was away hunting, he carefully approached the rock, moving with exaggerated slowness, hyper-aware of every sound and movement in the surrounding forest. In his hands, he carried the freshly killed carcass of one of the deer creatures, a peace offering of sorts. He had brought it down with a well-placed arrow, a clean kill that had required all his skill given the creature's extraordinary speed and erratic movement pattern. He placed the carcass on the edge of the rock, positioning it carefully so that Thunder would find it upon his return, but would not be forced to approach any potential hiding place to claim it. Then he retreated to a hiding place downwind, concealed in dense bushes with leaves like blue feathers. The location offered good visibility while maintaining excellent cover, and importantly, multiple escape routes should things go wrong. The hours stretched long as he waited, perfectly still despite the cramps that developed in his muscles. His training allowed him to maintain such stillness for extended periods, controlling even his breathing to minimize movement. Insects similar to Earth's dragonflies, but with dual wing pairs that operated independently, occasionally landed on his exposed skin, but he did not react, becoming as much a part of the forest as the trees themselves. The forest grew darker as the planet's sun began to set, casting long shadows through the trees. The natural bioluminescence of certain plants became more pronounced in the gathering darkness, creating pools of ghostly blue-green light throughout the understory. Nocturnal creatures began to emerge, floating organisms that drifted between trees like airborne jellyfish, their transparent bodies housing complex organs that pulsed with internal light. Small reptilian analogs that skittered across branches on adhesive pads. Something larger that moved through the canopy above, causing rhythmic swaying of branches but never showing itself clearly. A blue reflection caught Oswin's eye, Thunder returning to his resting place after what appeared to have been a successful hunt, judging by the blood that stained his muzzle. The wolf moved with confident strides, his territory well known to him, yet his vigilance never wavered. Every few steps he would pause, head raised, ears swiveling to catch any unusual sound, nostrils flaring to process the complex chemical signals of the forest. Then he froze completely, head raised in sudden alertness. He had caught the scent of the kill Oswin had left, or perhaps of Oswin himself. Thunder approached the rock with extreme caution, all his senses obviously heightened. He circled it 3 times, each circuit bringing him closer to the offering but never directly approaching it. He sniffed the air continuously, his nose working to detect any trap or danger. His movement pattern changed, more staccato, less fluid, ready to launch into either attack or retreat at the slightest provocation. Oswin remained absolutely motionless, controlling even his breathing to produce minimum sound and scent, though he knew his human odor would be impossible to eliminate entirely in this environment without technological assistance he did not possess. After what seemed an eternity of assessment, Thunder finally approached the offering. He sniffed it thoroughly, perhaps detecting Oswin's scent on it, but finding no immediate threat association. With one swift movement, the wolf grabbed the carcass and dragged it a safe distance from the rock before tearing into it with powerful jaws. The meal was over quickly, bones cracking under the pressure of those formidable teeth. Afterward, Thunder raised his head, blood staining his muzzle, and stared directly into the bushes where Oswin hid. For a heart-stopping moment, Oswin thought he had been discovered. Thunder's gaze seemed to penetrate his carefully chosen hiding place, those fiery eyes fixing on his position with uncomfortable precision. Oswin's hand moved fractionally toward his knife, an instinctive reaction he immediately suppressed. To draw a weapon now would confirm him as a threat, undoing the careful groundwork he was laying. But Thunder made no move to attack. He merely watched, those intelligent eyes seeing more than Oswin had anticipated. There was calculation in that gaze, assessment rather than simple predatory targeting. After a long, tense moment, the wolf turned away, lapping water from the stream before settling on his rock. His posture remained alert, but not aggressively so. He arranged himself facing Oswin's hiding place, neither challenging nor ignoring the human presence he had clearly detected. Oswin remained hidden until Thunder had fallen asleep, the wolf's breathing deepening and his massive body relaxing incrementally as vigilance gave way to rest. Only then did Oswin retreat, moving with painstaking care to avoid creating any sound that might disturb the predator. He made his way back to his camp, mind racing with analysis of the encounter. It had gone better than he had dared hope. Thunder had accepted his offering without aggression, had acknowledged his presence without immediate hostility. It was the smallest of beginnings, but in the taming of wild things, such small steps were everything. This ritual repeated for several days. Oswin would leave food, always fresh kills, never anything that Thunder might perceive as tainted or suspicious, and watch from hiding as the wolf claimed the offerings. Each time Thunder seemed less wary, though he never dropped his guard entirely. The time between his discovery of the food and his decision to claim it shortened. The intensity of his scrutiny of Oswin's hiding places decreased, suggesting growing comfort with this strange new pattern in his territory. Oswin began to vary his hiding spots, gradually decreasing the distance between himself and the rock where Thunder took his meals. This was a calculated risk, bringing him potentially within reach of those powerful jaws, should the wolf decide the human's presence was no longer acceptable. But it was a necessary step in the gradual process of habituation, allowing Thunder to become accustomed to Oswin's scent and presence at decreasing distances. He also began to speak softly while hidden, not immediately, but after Thunder had eaten and settled. He kept his voice low and soothing, speaking the language of his tribe, telling stories of great hunts and mighty beasts from his homeworld. The content of the words mattered less than their tone and rhythm, a constant, non-threatening sound that associated human voice with safety and satiation rather than danger or combat. At first, Thunder would growl at the sound, rising to his feet in alarm, scanning the forest for the source with hackles raised. But over time, he began to associate the voice with the provider of food and would merely raise his head, ears swiveling toward the sound, before resuming his rest. Occasionally, he would even make soft vocalizations in response. Not quite answers, but acknowledgments of the communication attempt. Oswin supplemented these vocal interactions with other forms of non-threatening presence. He began leaving small markers of his passage, stones arranged in patterns near Thunder's favorite paths, broken branches placed in configurations too regular to be natural. These served multiple purposes. They accustomed the wolf to evidence of human activity in his territory. They created reference points for Oswin's own navigation of the complex forest, and they established a form of indirect communication that mirrored the territorial marking behaviors of predators themselves. After 2 weeks of this gradual conditioning, Oswin decided to risk being seen. He chose his moment carefully. A tranquil afternoon when Thunder was drowsy after a large meal, the forest quiet except for the constant background hum of insectoid analogues and the gentle splash of the waterfall. Moving with deliberate slowness, Oswin emerged from his hiding place while the wolf was resting on his rock. He carried another fresh kill, which he placed on the ground before retreating several paces. Thunder immediately sprang to his feet, a deep growl rumbling from his chest. His hackles raised, making him appear even larger than his already imposing size. His tail arched over his back, a clear sign of aggressive alertness in canid species across multiple worlds. But despite these warning signals, he did not immediately attack. This in itself was significant. A predator of Thunder's capabilities could have crossed the distance between them in seconds had he perceived Oswin as immediate prey or threat. Oswin made no sudden movements. He stood his ground, not in challenge but in quiet confidence, his posture neither threatening nor submissive. He avoided direct eye contact, which many predator species interpreted as challenge, but did not look away entirely, which might have triggered pursuit instincts. His hands remained visible, empty except for the offering he had placed on the ground. His breathing remained deep and even, despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. "I bring you food, great hunter, as one predator to another." "We need not be enemies in this place," Oswin said softly. The wolf's growl intensified at the sound of his voice at this closer range, but curiosity warred with aggression in those fiery eyes. This human was behaving differently from any he had encountered before. No fear scent, no weapon raised against him, no aggressive advance or panicked retreat. Thunder took a step forward, then another, his massive head lowered, ready to spring if the human showed any sign of threat. Oswin remained still, maintaining a calm exterior despite his racing heart. He had faced dangerous predators before, had stared down creatures with more teeth, more claws, more obvious killing adaptations. But there was something different about Thunder, an intelligence behind those eyes that made this encounter feel less like managing a dangerous animal and more like negotiating with a sentient being from a different culture, one whose language and customs remained mysterious, but whose capacity for understanding was undeniable. After a tense standoff that seemed to stretch for hours but likely lasted only minutes, Thunder approached the kill. Still watching Oswin, he dragged it away to consume it, never fully turning his back. The message was clear. He would accept the offering but was not yet ready to trust completely. It was a compromise, a first step towards something that was neither domestication nor wild freedom, but a third path that encompassed elements of both. This was the breakthrough Oswin had been waiting for. He had been seen, acknowledged as the provider of food, and not immediately attacked. The foundation was laid for what would come next, a careful, gradual building of mutual understanding that would require patience, respect, and a willingness to learn the language of another species, not through words but through behavior, ritual, and shared experience. The days that followed saw a gradual escalation of contact. Oswin would appear with food, then sit at a distance while Thunder ate. He spoke constantly in his calm, low voice, telling the wolf about his homeworld, about the forests there that were green instead of blue, about the hunts of his youth. He described the tribal rituals that marked the seasons, the songs that honored successful hunts, the stories passed down through generations about the proper relationship between predator and prey, hunter and hunted. Whether Thunder understood the words or merely the tone was irrelevant. The bond was forming through association and routine, through the gradual establishment of patterns that both could recognize and anticipate. Oswin noticed that despite his fearsome reputation, Thunder displayed behaviors that were almost playful when he thought himself unobserved. The wolf would chase falling leaves, pounce on small, non-threatening creatures without killing them, and once spent an entire afternoon attempting to catch fish in the stream with comically poor results. These moments of what could only be described as joy revealed a dimension of Thunder's personality that went beyond the simple killer instinct Rosella had sought to exploit in the arena. There was complexity here, a being capable of curiosity, amusement, and perhaps even companionship under the right circumstances. During their interactions, Oswin began to experiment with scent marking, using techniques he had learned from tribal elders who specialized in communicating with the apex predators of his homeworld. He would rub tree sap on his hands and leave marks on stones and trees around Thunder's territory, gradually establishing his presence as a constant rather than an intrusion. Thunder would investigate these marks thoroughly, sometimes adding his own scent over them, a form of communication that transcended species barriers, a dialogue conducted through chemical signals rather than sounds or gestures. Each day brought small progressions in their unusual relationship. Thunder began to tolerate Oswin's presence at decreasing distances, watching him with alert curiosity rather than aggressive wariness. Oswin, in turn, learned to read the subtle changes in Thunder's body language, the position of his ears, the tension in his shoulders, the dilation of his pupils that signaled his mood and intentions. They were developing a shared vocabulary of sorts, a means of communicating across the vast gulf that separated their species. One morning, after several weeks of this careful relationship building, Oswin arrived at the clearing to find Thunder already waiting for him. The wolf sat on his haunches, expectant, having apparently learned the human schedule and anticipated his arrival. This was a significant development. Predators did not wait for potential threats, but they might wait for allies or providers. Thunder had made a categorical shift in how he classified Oswin in his mental landscape. Oswin approached slowly, carrying a haunch of meat from his most recent hunt. Instead of placing it on the ground as usual, he held it out in his hand. A massive risk, but one he felt was necessary for the next stage of trust building. This would bring those powerful jaws within inches of his flesh, would require Thunder to voluntarily enter his personal space and take food directly from him rather than from a safe distance. "Come, Thunder, take it from me. Show me that we understand each other," Oswin said calmly. Thunder stared at him, suspicion and hunger warring in his gaze. Minutes passed, neither moving. The forest seemed to hold its breath around them, the usual background sounds diminishing as if the ecosystem itself recognized the significance of this moment. Then, with deliberate slowness, the wolf approached. He stopped just short of Oswin, nostrils flaring as he took in the human scent. No longer unfamiliar, but not yet fully categorized as safe. Oswin did not move a muscle, though his heart pounded in his chest. This was the moment of truth. Thunder could take the meat gently, or he could decide to take the arm that held it. There was no technology here to protect him, no guards to intervene if things went wrong. There was only the understanding he had built, the language of mutual respect he had been constructing day by day. Finally, with a swift movement, Thunder snatched the meat from his hand and retreated to a safe distance to eat. His teeth had grazed Oswin's palm, sharp enough to draw blood had the wolf chosen to apply even slightly more pressure, but he had taken the offering with surprising gentleness, exhibiting control that spoke to both intelligence and intention. Oswin released the breath he had been holding. Blood pounded in his ears, and he felt lightheaded with the release of tension. He looked at his hand, unharmed, but tingling from the brush with those fearsome teeth. It was not trust, not yet, but it was acceptance. And that was the foundation upon which trust could be built. The relationship evolved over the following weeks at an accelerating pace. Having crossed the threshold of direct hand-feeding, other interactions became possible. Oswin began to bring tools of his trade, a brush made from forest materials to groom Thunder's coat, which the wolf initially resisted but gradually came to enjoy. The experience of grooming created another shared ritual, another opportunity for physical proximity, without threat. Thunder's fur was unlike anything Oswin had encountered before, not just in its color but in its texture, which seemed to shift between silky and coarse depending on how the light hit it, and in its subtle bioluminescent properties that became apparent in darkness. He brought a ball fashioned from wood and vines, which tapped into Thunder's playful nature. At first, the wolf regarded the object with suspicion, but after watching Oswin roll it and bounce it, he cautiously engaged, first pouncing on it when it came near him, later actively chasing it when Oswin threw it. These play sessions revealed another facet of Thunder's intelligence, his ability to understand the artificial nature of the game, to recognize boundaries between play and hunting, to participate in shared activity for mutual enjoyment rather than survival necessity. Most importantly, Oswin brought patience and consistency, never pushing too fast, always respecting Thunder's boundaries. There were setbacks along the way, moments when progress seemed to reverse, when the careful trust they were building seemed to fracture. Once, while attempting to touch Thunder's head for the first time, Oswin moved too quickly. The wolf snapped at him, teeth grazing his arm in warning. Oswin backed off immediately, respecting the rebuke, and returned to earlier stages of their interaction for several days before trying again with greater care and slower movements. Another time, Oswin arrived at their meeting place limping from a minor injury sustained while hunting. He had slipped on wet rocks while crossing the stream, twisting his ankle. Thunder reacted with unexpected aggression, perhaps interpreting the weakness as a threat to their developing pack structure, perhaps responding to changes in Oswin's scent caused by pain, or perhaps simply unsettled by the disruption to their established routine. It took hours of calm talking and careful movement to reestablish the equilibrium between them, to reassure the wolf that this change did not signal danger or deception. Through these challenges, Oswin learned as much about himself as he did about Thunder. He discovered reserves of patience he had not known he possessed, a capacity for communion with another species that transcended the hunter-prey relationship that had defined much of his life. In Thunder, he began to see not just a magnificent beast, but a kindred spirit, another being trapped between worlds, struggling to find its place in a cosmos that sought to categorize and control it rather than understand its essential nature. Their connection deepened in ways neither could have articulated, but both clearly felt. There were moments when they moved in unconscious synchronization, when Thunder would respond to commands Oswin had not consciously given, when Oswin would turn towards some forest sound at the exact moment Thunder's ears pricked to catch it. They were learning each other's rhythms, incorporating them into their own behavioral patterns in a dance of mutual adaptation. One afternoon, as they rested in a patch of sunlight that broke through the canopy, creating a warm pool of light on the forest floor, their peaceful companionship was shattered by an unexpected intrusion. Thunder sensed it first, his hackles rising as he stared into the forest with sudden intensity. Oswin followed his gaze and saw the flicker of blue protective fields through the trees, palace guards, likely sent to check on his whereabouts now that his extended absence from the healing chambers could no longer be explained away as part of his recovery process. Without hesitation, without need for communication, Oswin slipped into the undergrowth, Thunder following silently. Together they evaded the search party, moving deeper into the wilderness than Oswin had yet ventured. The wolf led the way, choosing paths that Oswin would not have found on his own, hidden trails that wound between massive tree trunks, narrow passages through dense underbrush that concealed their movement, shallow streams where they could travel without leaving tracks. This shared escape seemed to cement something between them, a partnership of sorts, a recognition that they faced common challenges and could overcome them together. In the days that followed, Thunder began to accompany Oswin on short excursions through the forest, sometimes leading the way to show hidden wonders of his domain, sometimes following as Oswin explored. They hunted together, with Oswin's bow bringing down larger prey than Thunder could catch alone, and the wolf's keen senses detecting game that Oswin would have missed. It was a symbiotic relationship, each contributing according to their strengths, each benefiting from the other's capabilities. One night, as they sheltered in a small cave during a violent thunderstorm, Oswin reflected on how far they had come. The wolf lay near the entrance, his massive body blocking the wind and rain, his blue fur occasionally illuminated by lightning flashes that matched his name. Oswin had built a small fire, and the dancing flames reflected in Thunder's eyes as he watched the human with what could only be described as companionable comfort. "We make a strange pack, you and I. Neither fully of this world, neither fully tamed nor fully wild. Perhaps that is why we understand each other," Oswin said quietly. Thunder's ears flicked toward him, acknowledging the sound of his voice. The wolf had grown accustomed to Oswin's speech, seemed almost to enjoy it, though whether he understood the words was impossible to know. What mattered was the connection that had formed between them, a bridge across the vast gulfs of species and experience that separated them. The storm raged through the night, but within their shelter, man and wolf found a peace that had eluded both of them for too long. Oswin slept soundly for the first time since his capture, confident that Thunder's vigilance would keep them safe. And when morning came, they emerged together into a forest washed clean by rain, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As days turned to weeks and weeks to months, their bond deepened in ways Oswin had never imagined possible. Thunder began to respond to commands in Oswin's tribal language, simple directives at first, but growing more complex as the wolf's understanding increased. More importantly, Oswin learned to read Thunder's body language with increasing precision, to understand the subtle differences in his growls and movements that conveyed his mood and intentions. Where once he had seen only a dangerous predator, now he recognized a complex being with desires, preferences, and a rich emotional life expressed through physical communication. They developed a form of communication that was neither fully human nor fully wolf, but something unique to them. A raised hand from Oswin might signal caution, while a particular tilt of Thunder's head could indicate prey nearby. They moved through the forest as a single unit, each compensating for the other's weaknesses, each enhancing the other's strengths. It was a partnership unlike any Oswin had known, transcending the boundaries between species to create something new, a relationship based not on dominance or submission, but on mutual recognition and respect. During this time, they established a shared territory, a region of the forest that they both recognized as home. Centered around the waterfall and the cave where they had weathered the storm, it extended outward in a rough circle that encompassed various resources they both required: hunting grounds, water sources, shelter options, vantage points. They marked its boundaries together, Thunder using traditional scent marking, Oswin using symbols carved into tree bark that would be recognized by any human tracker who might come looking for him. Within this territory, they established routines and rituals that gave structure to their days: morning hunts, midday rest periods, evening patrols along the boundaries. One evening, as they rested by the waterfall after a successful hunt that had yielded a large six-legged herbivore similar to an elk, Oswin decided to take the final risk. He sat near Thunder, close enough to touch, but not doing so, respecting the space between them as he had learned to do. He spoke softly, as had become his habit. "I am not here to break your spirit, Thunder. I am not here to make you less than what you are. The Empress wants you tamed, but I seek something different. I seek understanding between us. You are wild. I too am wild in my heart. Perhaps that is why we can speak without words." Oswin said quietly. Thunder watched him with those intelligent eyes, head tilted slightly as if contemplating the sounds. The wolf had become increasingly responsive to Oswin's voice over time, seeming to recognize patterns in the speech even if the semantic content remained inaccessible to his non-human mind. There was a tension. In his gaze, a focus that suggested more than simple animal awareness. Then, with deliberate movement, the wolf rose and closed the distance between them. Oswin held his breath as Thunder circled him once, twice, a behavior that had become part of their greeting ritual, but now carried a different energy, a greater intentionality. After completing the circles, instead of returning to his usual resting spot, Thunder lay down beside him, close enough that Oswin could feel the heat from his massive body radiating through the cooling evening air. It was a moment of profound connection, one that Oswin had not experienced since being taken from his homeworld. In the sterile environments of alien ships, in the artificial combat zones of distant arenas, in the calculated luxury of Rosella's palace, he had been isolated, physically surrounded by other beings but spiritually alone. Now, paradoxically, in the company of a non-human creature from a world not his own, he found a sense of belonging that had been missing for too long. Tears pricked at his eyes, unexpected and almost embarrassing. He was a warrior, a hunter, not given to emotional displays. Yet the simple trust inherent in Thunder's proximity moved him in ways he had not anticipated. Cautiously, giving Thunder every opportunity to move away, he raised his hand and placed it gently on the wolf's flank. The fur was softer than he had imagined, warm and alive beneath his fingers. Thunder tensed momentarily, then relaxed, accepting the touch. "Thank you for this trust. I will not betray it," Oswin said, his voice thick with emotion. The peaceful moment shattered without warning. Thunder suddenly sprang to his feet, knocking Oswin backward. Before he could recover, the wolf pounced, pinning him to the ground with his massive weight. Oswin felt the hot breath on his face, saw the gleaming teeth inches from his throat. Fear surged through him. Had he misread everything? Was this the end of his journey, to be torn apart after coming so close to the understanding he sought? "Thunder! Stop!" Oswin gasped. The wolf growled, teeth bared, but made no move to bite. Instead, he closed his jaws gently around Oswin's arm, the same arm he had nearly torn off in the arena months before. The pressure was firm but controlled, not breaking the skin but clearly demonstrating the potential to do so. Oswin understood with sudden clarity. This was a test, a final assessment of trust. Thunder was establishing dominance while simultaneously showing restraint, demonstrating his power while offering Oswin the opportunity to acknowledge it without combat. It was a moment of truth, requiring perfect response. Too much submission might trigger predatory instinct. Too much resistance might provoke genuine aggression. Oswin found the balance, remaining still but maintaining eye contact, neither challenging nor cowering. "You are strong, magnificent in your power. I acknowledge your strength," Oswin said, breathing hard. Thunder maintained the hold for several seconds more, then released him and backed away. Oswin sat up slowly, rubbing his arm. There were indentations from the wolf's teeth, but no puncture wounds, not even bruising, a testament to Thunder's incredible control and precision. He looked at Thunder with new understanding. This had not been aggression, but communication. The language of pack animals establishing hierarchy and boundaries, setting the terms of their relationship in a way both could understand. "You are still wild, and that wildness is your beauty. I do not seek to change that," Oswin said with respect. The wolf regarded him for a long moment, then approached again, this time gently nudging Oswin's hand with his massive head. The gesture was clear: permission to touch, invitation to continue the physical connection that had been interrupted. Oswin carefully stroked the blue fur, feeling the powerful muscles beneath. Thunder tolerated the contact, then stepped back, shaking himself as if to say that was enough for now. It was the turning point in their relationship. From that day forward, Thunder accepted Oswin as part of his world, not as master or subordinate, but as packmate, as partner in the complex business of survival. They moved through the forest together, not as tamer and tame beasts, but as companions who had chosen each other. Oswin taught Thunder commands in his tribal language. which the wolf learned with surprising quickness. Thunder, in turn, taught Oswin the secret paths of the forest, the hidden places where crystal formations caught the light and transformed it into rainbows, the deep caves where strange, luminous fungi created landscapes of light. They developed hunting techniques that combined Thunder's speed and power with Oswin's tactical thinking and ranged weapons. They established routines for sleeping, eating, and patrolling their shared territory. They created a life together in the wilderness, a partnership that transcended the boundaries of species and origin. In this alien forest, far from his homeworld and everything familiar, Oswin found something he had not expected. Not mere survival, but purpose, connection, and a kind of freedom he had thought forever lost. Months passed in this way, the bond between them growing stronger with each shared hunt, each quiet evening by the waterfall, each storm weathered together in the shelter of ancient trees. Oswin had almost forgotten his original purpose, lost in the wonder of this connection across species. But reality could not be held at bay forever. One morning as they drank from the stream, the forest fell unnaturally silent. The constant background hum of insectoid life ceased. The rustling movements of small creatures stilled. Thunder raised his head, ears pricked forward, a low growl building in his chest. Oswin sensed it too. They were no longer alone. From the trees stepped a contingent of palace guards, their blue fields humming with energy, weapons, trained on both wolf and man. Oswin of Earth, the Empress Rosella demands your presence. It is time for you to fulfill your bargain, the guard captain Morin stated. The captain's voice carried a hint of surprise, perhaps at finding Oswin alive, perhaps at seeing him standing calmly beside the unleashed thunder. The guards maintained a wary formation, their weapons ready but not yet activated to lethal settings. They were uncertain how to proceed, faced with a situation their training had not prepared them for. Oswin stood slowly, one hand resting on Thunder's back, feeling the tension in the wolf's muscles. He had known this day would come, had perhaps postponed it longer than he should have. The guards watched nervously as Thunder growled at them, clearly remembering his captivity at their hands. "It is all right, my friend. We face this together," Oswin said softly to Thunder. He felt the wolf relax slightly under his touch, responding to the calm confidence in his voice. Thunder remained alert but followed Oswin's lead, trusting his judgment in this unfamiliar situation. To the guards, Oswin's voice hardened. "I will come, but Thunder comes with me, freely, no chains, no restraints." "Those days are done." The guards exchanged uncertain glances, clearly uncomfortable with the idea of an unrestrained Thunder in the palace. Their hands tightened on their weapons, and one began to reach for the control device they had previously used to manage the wolf. The Empress gave no instructions regarding the beast. "We were sent to retrieve you, not it," Morin said reluctantly. "Then you had better contact your Empress for new instructions, because I will not return without him, and you will not take him by force without significant casualties among your squad," Oswin stated firmly. It was not an idle threat. Thunder's capabilities in combat were well known to the guards, many of whom bore scars from previous attempts to control him. And Oswin himself was no easy target, as his survival in the arena had demonstrated. Together in the forest, they both knew intimately they could inflict serious damage before being subdued. After a tense standoff, Morin activated a communication device and spoke quietly with someone at the palace, presumably Rosella herself or one of her direct subordinates. The conversation was brief but clearly intense, judging by the captain's expression and posture. Finally, he turned back to Oswin. "The Empress has agreed to your condition. The wolf may accompany you without restraint, but if there is any sign of aggression," Morin began. "There will not be, not unless provoked," Oswin interrupted. The guards finally agreed, though they maintained a wary distance as the strange pair followed them from the forest. Oswin spoke softly to Thunder throughout the journey, explaining what was happening, where they were going. The wolf remained close to his side, occasionally brushing against his leg as if seeking reassurance in this return to the world of confinement and control they had both escaped. Their progress through the palace grounds caused a sensation. Servants stopped their tasks to stare. Courtiers whispered behind ornate fans. Guards stiffened to attention with hands near their weapons. The presence of an unrestrained thunder was unprecedented, a disruption of the careful order that governed life in Rosella's domain. Word of their approach spread ahead of them, and by the time they reached the throne room, a crowd had gathered to witness the spectacle. The palace seemed smaller to Oswin now, its grandiose architecture less impressive after the natural majesty of the forest. The artificial lights, the regulated temperature, the geometrically precise layouts, all seemed constrained and lifeless compared to the organic complexity of the wilderness they had left behind. Thunder padded beside him, occasionally brushing against his leg, clearly uneasy among the confining walls, but trusting Oswin enough to follow. His fur seemed more vibrantly blue under the palace lighting, creating a stark contrast with the muted colors that dominated the imperial aesthetic. The throne room doors swung open, revealing the same arena where their journey had begun. This time, however, the stands were filled to capacity. Aliens of various ranks and stations murmured as Oswin entered with Thunder at his side. The wolf's fur seemed to glow brighter in the palace lighting, each hair capturing and amplifying the illumination. There was no fear in his bearing now, no confusion or rage, only alert awareness and a dignity that commanded attention. Rosella sat on her black throne, exactly as she had months ago. Her posture was the same, her expression still unreadable. But as Oswin approached with Thunder walking freely beside him, something changed in her silvery eyes. A widening, a spark of what might have been surprise on any other face. For a being accustomed to controlling every aspect of her domain, this unexpected development represented something rare and valuable, a genuine surprise, a deviation from predicted outcomes. Oswin stopped at a respectful distance from the throne. Thunder sat beside him, regal and calm, though his eyes never left Rosella. There was recognition there, memory of their previous encounter, but no fear, no submission, only watchful awareness. The contrast with their first meeting could not have been more stark. Where once there had been a desperate battle for survival, now there was composed presence. Where there had been hatred and fear, now there was mutual respect. The throne room fell completely silent, hundreds of alien eyes fixed on this unprecedented scene. Rosella leaned forward slightly, the first betrayal of emotion Oswin had seen from her. Oswin of Earth, you have done the impossible. You have tamed Thunder, the most ferocious predator on our world, she said, her voice carrying a tremor of amazement. Her voice echoed in the silent chamber, carrying to every corner of the vast room. The courtiers and nobles in attendance shifted slightly, exchanging glances that communicated their astonishment. Some leaned forward for a better view, others maintained careful neutrality, waiting to see how this unexpected development would affect their own positions in the complex hierarchy of Rosella's court. Oswin shook his head slowly, his movement deliberate and unhurried. He stood differently now than he had months ago. Not as a captive or gladiator, but as a man who had found his place, who had reconnected with the core of who he was meant to be. "No, Your Majesty, I have not tamed him. One does not tame the storm or the sea. I have earned his trust, his friendship. He follows me by choice, not coercion. The wild remains in him as it should," Oswin explained. At the sound of his name, Thunder looked up at Oswin, then back at Rosella, as if understanding the conversation. His ears moved forward, attentive but not aggressive, his posture relaxed but dignified. Rosella studied them both, her composure slightly broken for the first time in perhaps centuries. She rose from her throne, descending several steps toward them, an unprecedented action that caused a ripple of surprise through the assembly. "In all my long years, I have never witnessed such a thing. Thunder has killed dozens of my best warriors, has resisted every attempt at control through technology and force. Yet he stands beside you now, calm and obedient without restraint," Rosella observed. "Not obedient, Your Majesty, respectful. There is a difference. He has chosen to accept me, as I have chosen to accept him. We are bonded not by dominance but by understanding. Each recognizes the other's nature and responds accordingly," Oswin corrected. To demonstrate, he gave Thunder a hand signal they had developed, a subtle gesture that would be barely noticeable to observers. The wolf rose and walked a circle around him, then returned to sit at his side. Several courtiers gasped at the display, not merely at the obedience shown, but at the fluid grace with which Thunder moved, so different from the rage-filled creature they remembered from the arena. I promised you my planet if you could tame this predator. My word was given, and I keep it, Rosella declared, standing for the first time. A murmur of shock ran through the assembly. Oswin himself was taken aback. He had not truly expected her to honor such an extravagant promise. In his time in the forest with Thunder, the original bargain had receded in importance, replaced by the intrinsic value of their bond. Rosella descended the steps from her throne, her movements fluid and graceful. She approached closer than protocol would normally allow, studying both man and wolf with intense curiosity. However, I cannot simply yield control of an entire world overnight. Such transitions require adjustment, she continued. Oswin had expected this qualification. He waited for her true offer, understanding that in politics, whether human or alien, initial statements were often opening positions rather than final terms. Rosella circled them slowly, her gaze analytical, assessing. Thunder watched her movement, but remained calm under Oswin's hand. Instead, I propose this. You will become my chief advisor, with authority second only to my own. You will teach my people what you have learned about connection rather than conquest. In time, when you have proven your wisdom in governance as you have in the wild, the full promise shall be fulfilled, she proposed. Oswin considered her words carefully. He had not sought power or dominion when he began this journey, only freedom and perhaps a return to the stars and eventually his home. But in the months with Thunder, something had changed within him. He had found a purpose here, a chance to bridge worlds, to bring understanding where there had been only fear and control. He looked down at Thunder, who returned his gaze with those intelligent, fiery eyes. The wolf had taught him as much as he had taught Thunder, about patience, about the strength found in trust rather than domination, about the beauty of wildness tempered by choice rather than broken by force. These were lessons that could benefit this world, perhaps many worlds. I accept your offer, Empress Rosella, with one condition, Oswin said with quiet determination. Name it, Rosella replied, eyebrow raised. Thunder remains free by my side, never again to be chained or forced to fight for entertainment. His forest remains protected, a sanctuary for his kind, Oswin stated. Rosella looked at the wolf, who stared back at her without flinching. Something passed between predator and empress, a recognition perhaps of kindred spirits who had both met their match in different ways. It shall be as you say. The forest of the north shall be declared sacred ground, under your protection and that of your companion. No hunting, no development, no intrusion without your explicit permission, she agreed, nodding slowly. She turned to address the assembled court, her voice ringing with authority. Witness this day. Oswin of Earth has accomplished what none thought possible. He has not broken Thunder's spirit, but has found a way to communicate across the boundaries of species. He shall stand as chief advisor to the throne, his wisdom to guide our future, and the forest of the north shall be declared sacred ground under his protection and that of his companion. The announcement was met with stunned silence, followed by a wave of murmurs that spread through the crowd. Oswin knew that not all would welcome this change, that there would be challenges ahead. Some would see him as a threat to established power structures, others as an opportunity to advance their own ambitions through association with this new influence. Politics, he reflected, was its own kind of wilderness, with predators and prey, territories and alliances, just expressed, through different means. But he had faced worse challenges and survived. With Thunder at his side and the wisdom gained through their shared journey, he could navigate these new complexities. Perhaps more importantly, he could bring something new to this world. An understanding that true strength came not from domination, but from connection, not from breaking the wild, but from learning its language. As the formal ceremony concluded and the court began to disperse, Oswin knelt beside Thunder, running his hand through the star-like fur. The wolf leaned into his touch, a gesture of affection that would have been unthinkable months ago. We have come far together, my friend. Now our real journey begins, Oswin said softly. Thunder looked up at him with those ancient, knowing eyes. then pressed his massive head against Oswin's chest in a gesture of trust and loyalty that needed no words. Together they would forge a new understanding between species, between worlds, not through conquest or submission, but through respect for the wild spirit that lived in all beings. As they left the throne room side by side, Rosella watched them go, a new respect in her gaze. She had offered a planet as a prize, never expecting it to be claimed. Instead, she had gained something perhaps more valuable, a new vision for her world, one built on connection rather than control. The human had not tamed the wolf, he had befriended it, and in doing so he had changed not only the beast, but the very foundation of her empire.